romantically involved with Dumb and Dumber co-star Lauren Holly.
There are moments in Hollywood that don't immediately grab headlines. Moments that quietly build over time, subtly changing how people see someone they thought they understood. Then suddenly, without warning, they surface, not through scandal or lawsuits, but through someone who simply decides to speak honestly. That's exactly what happened when Dave Chappelle began sharing his experience with Jim Carrey. Not in a roast or a cheap-shot comedy routine, but in a thoughtful, reflective way that suggested he had truly processed something uncomfortable and was still slightly unsettled by it. The thing about Dave Chappelle is that he doesn't speak recklessly. Throughout his career, he has chosen his words carefully, often wrapping serious truths in humor so sharp that audiences don't realize the impact until later. So when he speaks about another entertainer, especially one he once admired, and the story isn't flattering, people listen. It doesn't feel like gossip, it feels like testimony. And what he shared about Jim Carrey revealed a side many weren't prepared to see. To understand why his story carried so much weight, you first have to understand what Jim Carrey represented to an entire generation. He wasn't just a comedian or an actor, he was something closer to a phenomenon. In the early 1990s, he went from an unknown Canadian performer grinding through clubs to one of the most successful and recognizable entertainers in the world. Films like Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, The Mask, and Dumb and Dumber didn't just succeed, they reshaped how audiences viewed physical comedy. Carrey pushed his body and face beyond normal limits, stretching expressions and movements into something almost unreal. He could take a simple scene and transform it into something entirely different by the end. For Dave Chappelle, who was rising in the same era, Carrey represented freedom. He proved that you didn't need to follow traditional rules or tone yourself down to succeed. He was bold, unpredictable, and undeniably successful. For a young comedian trying to find his identity in a tough industry, that kind of example leaves a lasting impression. So when Chappelle finally got the opportunity to meet him, the excitement was real and the respect was genuine. That's what makes what happened next so surprising. The meeting took place on the set of Man on the Moon, the 1999 film where Jim Carrey portrayed the eccentric comedian Andy Kaufman. The introduction came through Norm Macdonald, someone both men respected. Under normal circumstances, it should have been a perfect setup: 3 comedians, mutual respect, and a creative environment. It should have been a great experience, but according to Chappelle, Jim Carrey wasn't there, and that wasn't metaphorical. When Chappelle arrived, the person in front of him wasn't Jim Carrey, it was Andy Kaufman, completely and fully. Carrey had committed to staying in character not just during filming, but at all times. On set, off set, in conversations, during meals, he was Kaufman. The voice, the behavior, the reactions, everything belonged to the character. What made it even more unsettling was the environment around it. The crew had adapted to this reality. They addressed him as Andy, treated him as Andy, and no one broke the illusion. When Chappelle walked in, he stepped into a world that had already been constructed, one he was expected to accept without any preparation. Later, Chappelle described the experience with humor, but there was clearly something deeper underneath. It wasn't just awkward, it lasted for hours. An entire afternoon of interacting with someone he knew was Jim Carrey, yet who refused to acknowledge that identity. Myra wasn't fooled by the performance, he could clearly see the man behind it, but Carrey had made a conscious decision not to show up as himself. That experience left an impression. Not in a dramatic way, but in the quiet way certain encounters stay with you. The Jim Carrey Chappelle had admired, the one who seemed fearless and authentic, was nowhere to be found that day. Instead, he encountered something far more complicated. The broader context makes the story even more revealing. Carrey's dedication to the role of Andy Kaufman has become legendary, though not always in a positive sense. The making of Man on the Moon is often cited as one of the most extreme examples of method acting, later explored in the Netflix documentary Jim and Andy, The Great Beyond. In that documentary, Carrey described the experience not as simple acting, but as something closer to losing himself entirely. He didn't just stay in character, he dissolved into it. He created tension on set, pushed boundaries, and behaved in ways that mirrored Kaufman's unpredictable nature. At one point, he even described it as feeling like possession, as if Kaufman's energy had taken over. This created a difficult environment for everyone involved. Directors and crew had to work around a presence that was both the lead actor and a disruptive force. Some adapted, others stepped aside. And for people like Chappelle, who walked into that environment without warning, it became something they had to process afterward. Chappelle's story doesn't suggest that Jim Carrey is a bad person. It doesn't dismiss his talent either. His performance in Man on the Moon was widely praised. But it raises a deeper question. When does commitment to a role stop being art and become something else? At what point does staying in character begin to affect the people around you in ways that can't be ignored? From Chappelle's perspective, the impact was real. He showed up with genuine respect, expecting a real interaction. Instead, he spent hours speaking to a performance, something he hadn't agreed to be part of. That experience, intentional or not, communicated distance. It suggested that people around Carrey were either part of his process or obstacles within it. Looking at Carrey's life adds even more depth. He came from hardship, a working-class upbringing that at one point left his family living in a van. As a teenager, he worked as a janitor to support them. That early struggle created a powerful drive to become something bigger, something impossible to ignore. He started performing at 15, bombing early shows but refusing to quit. Through rejection and setbacks, he kept going until success finally came. But somewhere along the way, that hunger didn't disappear, it transformed. The need to become something beyond himself only grew stronger with fame. That pattern is what Chappelle encountered on that set. He went to meet a person but found a performance, one that felt less like acting and more like identity itself. It was as if returning to being Jim Carrey, even briefly, wasn't possible anymore, or perhaps wasn't something Carrey wanted. Carrey himself has spoken about losing his identity during that period not with regret, but with a kind of relief, as if disappearing into a character offered an escape from something deeper. When you place that alongside Chappelle's experience, a clearer picture forms, not of a villain but of someone complex. A man whose talent and struggles are so tightly connected that separating them may not even be possible. Dave Chappelle has never built his reputation on tearing others down. What he shared about Jim Carrey wasn't an attack. It was an honest account of an experience that left a lasting impression.